Om. Om Pranam. Om Pranam. Om Pranam. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Infinite Om. 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 Got in the happening of Satyavatara Satsangha, number 6. Om. Om, welcome. Om. God in the happening of Satyavatara Satsangha, number 6. Om. There are some teachings and reviewing of teachings here. And then there can be opening to transmitting and receiving the calls. Om. God willing. Om. And as for the calling, there is what is considered a 15-second delay in eternity between the transmitting and the receiving. So that may or may not complicate matters in some way, and there might need to be adjustment. But however, this shall proceed nevertheless, and that is to be figured out. Om. Om. There's incoming. This is being noted as to the incoming transmission, and then they'll be calling back. So if there is seeing this transmission, then seemingly be patient, and then they'll be calling to have that transmitting and receiving occur. Om. First, there's some material that needs to be transmitted. Om. Om Pranam. Om. All right. So, Om, God in the Happy Nymph, in the description of this live stream, this Satsanga, in the description that accompanies the videoing, there is an extra link that has been added. Om. And it is to SSSV 68 Om, which is a very, very important teaching. It is so essential that there has been what is considered even a card graphic that has been made that can be downloaded to the GIFO cell phones and carried around and referred to. It should be favorited in the photos section of the various cell phones, God in the form of the cell phones. And then as for dehypnotization, that it be referred to, and if there is any cloudy phenomenon in the thinking occurring, that it be clicked on and referred to and read and absorbed in God consciousness to counteract opaque fictional thinking that might be occurring. So the link goes to the scripture, SSSV 68, and also to the image that can be downloaded to whatever devices are preferred. Now, to be God transmitted, first there'll be a listing, as speaking, an enumeration of the 5 obstacles to self-realization. There is a live stream, LSSV, which is also on the links and seemingly the table of contents to all of the live stream teachings, God in the Happening of. Those are links in the description as well. These are all very important links down below in the seeming description on the on the in this transmitting that is occurring. Om, God and the happening of. So that scripture should be located, and this will be given, the number shall be given here. To the actual live stream. Om. It is LSSV 10. LSSV 10. And it's called The 5 Main Obstacles to Self-Realization. So many of these live stream teachings, the God and the happening of the LSSVs, are very foundational, introductory teachings. They are seminal teachings of Satyavedism, and many of them are quite lengthy, seemingly in relativity, speak of time, which does not exist. But the actual content that is within is quite voluminous. So the list that is linked in the description links to the 28 so far live stream teachings, almost all of which are quite important and seminal, and need to be absorbed in God consciousness. So this one in particular is referring to the 5 obstacles of self-realization, to self-realization. So the first obstacle is language. Language is the main hypnotic tool. So ever since seemingly, if one believes that one is a person, then ever since as seemingly young in the fictional lineage, which does not really exist, one has been hypnotized by language, by seeming others around, God in the form of Om. So when the language was started to be learned, and then absorbed, and then there became greater and greater ability to use vocabulary, and seemingly are to tangentially speak of vocabulary shortly. That the language, basically, as it is acquired and as it is absorbed and becomes truth content, which is not truth because it's fiction, then basically the absorbing of all this information is done almost primarily through language, and that is the great hypnotic tool. Since language is primarily speaking of relativity and of agreement upon concepts in species fiction, basically one seeming species of many, of countless seeming species in the omniverse, then these languages, there are varieties of languages, and those languages to some extent have different flavors and different ways of expressing species fiction, and some are more. Not all languages are the same. In other words, there are differences between language, but the commonality with language is that they seemingly break reality apart. Reality that is one is broken and seemingly divided into many, and there are great narratives and stories that are expressed through that language that basically are not true. So the main hypnotic tool is through language. So it is the primary obstacle to self-realization. And God-like is the antidote. And there are other devices for this as well, for breaking through this. Number 2 is sensory vision. So as long as what is seen is basically believed that is an obstacle to self-realization, because in fact most of what is seen is only a very minute part of the seemingly of the whole of reality. So to basically found one's whole worldview upon what is seen is ignorance. So again, the SSV 10 goes into this extensively. So this is more of a perfunctory introduction to the obstacles. The third is the primary pseudo-egoing process. Primary, as in primary apparent body or apparent primary body, so too the apparent primary pseudo-egoing process, because the ego is not a thing. The ego, seemingly being referred to mainly in spirituality, is referred to usually as a noun and a thing that has to be gotten rid of. But in fact, it's an ongoing process that is constantly changing, and its fictional content changes as well. So it is not a static thing, and it is not even something that is more or less stays in a certain sort of form or can be really referred to as such. So it is a process, as is all of what is seen. It is only process. The same form that is pointed to is not the same form right now. It's changed. It is not. And there are forms within forms within forms. So too, what is called an ego is seemingly constantly changing. It is not a thing. It's a process, just as everything is a process. And 4 is the collective pseudo-egoing. That's when all the processes are working in they're all parallel, working and interacting, and all the functioning is all occurring all at once, and the interactioning affects other interactioning, and it becomes what is seemingly called group pseudo-egoing, or on a larger seeming scale, as in with the cult of humanity, it's a collective pseudo-egoing. It's a collective dreaming, because the pseudo-egoing content is almost entirely fiction, dreaming about reality instead of actual reality and what it really is. And 5, that lends itself from the collective pseudo-egoing to 5, which is that when it accumulates and it becomes customary, and basically it becomes consensual reality, this virtual reality that is not real, then it is species centrism, because it's primarily based upon one species and everything about it. It's fixated on being seemingly a species, and all of the various activity and importance that is lent to all of that content, and it is center stage in the whole existence of reality as a whole. It is fixated upon narcissistically, unintentionally, as species centrism, and is fiction, the fiction of it, and fiction. So those are the 5 main, because there are many other seeming obstacles to self-realization. Those are the main 5. Again, language, sensory vision, primary pseudo-egoing process, collective pseudo-egoing process, and species centrism and fiction. So there are many teachings on this, and many more to come, obviously. But those need to be stated for the Satsanghas, so that there is context that can start to be, well, when working upon the deconstruction of these, of this information. Now, as for SSSV 68, that these two teachings sort of can work in tandem. So 68 is the non-identification with limiting assertions. Again, non-identification with limiting assertions. They're not really limiting, but they appear, it seems to be limiting. These concepts. Instead of asserting the true identity, there are many assertions of the fictional identity, the individual identities that are not real. So these are enumerated in this teaching, and this is primarily false conceptualization. False conceptualization of what one is and what others seemingly are, and collective others are. So there should be there's going into this right now in eternity. Again, in the live stream teachings, this has gone into extensively. Going to hear it. So again, the link down below seemingly leads to the SSSV 68. Now, non-identification with limiting assertions. False conceptualization. This is being read so that it can be introduced into the transmitting and receiving in the Satsanghas. Practice non-identification, undefined and unbound by fictional concepts of being one, a person, individual, or entity, or belonging to body, gender, race, species. Again, body, gender, race, species. 3, collective, group, collective, aggregate. Group, collective, aggregate. 4, country, planet, location. Country, planet, location. 5, history, period of time, like an epoch, etc. This cannot be repeated enough. Again, 1, person, individual, entity. 2, body, gender, race, species. 3, group, collective, aggregate. 4, country, planet, location. 5, history, period in time. Simply repressing or ignoring such concepts is ineffective. Deconstruction of unreal conceptual structures leads to reduction in the phenomenon of false thought content, facilitating dehypnotization and purification. These enumerated limiting concepts that are central to imagined stories and narratives with no reality must be directly seen through and truly understood as illusory and erroneous, so that they cease to reoccur as thought content with which there is any identification. Om. And then here is the graphic, God in the form of, that should be downloaded to the phone, etc., and referred to. The scripture speaks for itself over and over and over again in God consciousness. Om. That's great. Set as background. Om, pranam. Even better. Use the graphic in any way conceivable. Om. Toward truth. Now, as for the assignment, or the spiritual practice that was assigned, rather, Om. As for the on this previous Satsangha, Om, quote unquote, Om, that had to do with the Satyavatara is to continue. As for the God and the happening of the plague that exists in you, in Gifo, God in the form of humanity, about criticism, the spreading of fictional content in the form of what is called criticism, basically. Speaking against others, speaking against oneself, thinking against oneself, thinking against others, etc., is a sickness. So the spiritual practice of reserving criticism, not only in speech, but in thinking as well, because thought is action. And then speech is also action. So thought occurs first, then speech, usually. It does. So, for the criticism, there should to be mentioned additionally that this happens in what in fiction fantasy is called group. Again, there are no groups, but when there is God, the happening of transmitting and receiving of thought content that is of a seeming negative nature, and it is called basically criticism, that there is this there is this transmitting and receiving that happens, especially in what is called groups or groupthink. And there is encouragement to participate and to relish even criticizing. One of the main notorious arenas, seemingly, of this type of activity is got in the form of Twitter, that is merciless in group criticism. And so this is to be the spiritual practice, is that is to be ceased, because all it is accomplishing is more perpetuation and propagation of fictional thought content that is harmful to seeming bodies. So if there is criticism, seemingly fictional thought content seemingly occurring, and there is pulling into or attractioning to participating, to alluring into the participation in order to speak, basically to interact in some way, because this is all about, in fiction, wanting to be accepted or wanting to fit in certain ways, when there is in seeming context. So when this criticism is occurring, there should be pulling back from participating in it, even no matter how seeming cool it may appear to be, or funny, or being carried away with it, that all it is perpetuating fictional stories, usually about others and shortcomings of other apparent bodies, and narratives and stories that are not real and are untrue, because there's no way of quantifying most of what is being said. And so there should be refraining from such activity. It is easier, seemingly, to stop seemingly oneself from criticizing by checking the thought and then ceasing it, than when there seems to be in the middle of a seeming group speaking against a person or others, or even seeming corporations or social structures, etc., and bashing the concept of those that don't exist that way. For instance, a corporation is not a corporation. That is just a word and a concept that is slapped on endless phenomenological processing that cannot be reduced to a thing like that. So most of what is thought then in the group seeming criticism that apparently is occurring, that is not in fact that. So it's basically all dreaming. It's all some conceptual nonsense, basically, that is untrue. So not only is it is not healthy for the seeming apparent bodies to be partaking in that activity, and then harmful to the other seeming apparent bodies that might be being spoken of. But toward self-realization, it just is continuance of ignorance and fiction that is not conducive to self-realization. or God realization. So that is more difficult sometimes. It seemingly is more difficult when there is, quote, group criticism going on, ganging up seemingly to criticize others, whether it be persons or things or whatever, that be refrained from. Because the more and more criticism is refrained from, the more there is alleviating of all the stress on the bodies, the body, the apparent primary body and the other seeming bodies, that there is alleviation of much stress. And it is not about repressing thoughts that need to get out in order to blow off steam or whatever in the form of criticism. It is not that. What is being said is that if there is basically, if there's a nightmare going on in the dreaming, then it is best to wake up from the dream than continue to add fire to the nightmare. It solves the problem much better, quote unquote, the seeming problem much better than flailing around criticizing in a dream. And mainly what happens with criticism is that there's no real solutioning. There's just a lot of energy spent complaining basically about situations without resolving, either through self-realization or within the dream even. This happens, that there is not much solutioning that happens, but there's more camaraderie that occurs from the group complaining, and then nothing happens. There's just continued complaining in many different levels with not much solutioning. So it does not really serve much of a purpose even within the dream, let alone that waking up out of all of that is much preferred, and that is toward the solution. So in the spiritual practice of refraining from criticism, it is very important to try to refrain from criticism when seemingly in fiction there are various configurations or seeming group criticism, ganging up on or whatever, or just back and forth transmitting and receiving of seemingly apparent two bodies speaking against another. And that goes for what are called famous bodies as well. There is no difference between a seemingly non-famous body and a famous body. So what happens is there's a lot of group ganging up on a famous body because the famous body is fair game by being famous seemingly. And then that is not even treated like with any care. After a while, the famous body can be mercilessly defamed and spoken horribly about just because of the famousness. There's no longer seemingly any love involved. Seemingly objectified to that degree. And so anyway, there are many different forms of criticism, in other words. So, but the best practice, best spiritual practice, is to cease criticism in all forms. Now that does not mean that there are many, the God evolution of God in the form of the world must occur. So there is much solutioning that has to occur and much evolution that has to occur, but it need not occur with criticism and throwing of fits, basically, because what is the world is not the way it should be and all of that, or this person is not the way this person should be and all of that casting around in the dream. So as long as there are dreams and nightmares and various levels of that or whatever, then there's no real God vision of God reality, then it is really very wasteful of energy. It's very, very wasteful of God energy. So it is very, very important to stop criticism, because almost it's not true. The criticism is not true. It's not true. It's criticizing phantoms. It's criticizing the false conceptualization that is processed in various configurations. It's criticizing that. It's criticizing thoughts. It's criticizing concepts. It's not criticizing actual phenomenological reality. It's dreaming. So it's there's no benefit to it. So it's a great spiritual practice. It's an essential spiritual practice to stop criticizing and stop complaining. Stop complaining about your dream. You have the great power to change reality. And if you are dreaming and criticizing reality and criticizing your dream of reality, then you are dreaming within dreaming and wasting God energy. So that has to stop. Stop. Cease. So it's a spiritual practice. And no, it may seem difficult. It's difficult because there's so used to in the cult of humanity it's one of the primary functions. It's one of the primary activities. So they have to pull away from that and stop that. And it's difficult because everyone else is doing it. Seemingly in the dream. So in the seeming group criticism going on, be quiet. Don't have to speak out against that. You don't have to say, hey, stop doing that or whatever. It depends on the level of comfortability of it. Satya might very well do that because Satya speaks truth directly. But for those seemingly that are, when there's not being used to this, when there is beginning this practice, then it is best when there seemingly is group activity to refrain and to practice mona, to be quiet, or to seemingly change the subject in some way, creative way, good-naturedly, without judgment, because they were not aware of this. It's no one's fault. It just happens. It's a happening in God. So that become conscious as witnessing this phenomenon, and then refrain and watch, observe. This is how this practice, the behavioring change, the thought content changing, overturning will occur just by the witnessing of it, by the listening, by the being quiet and listening and questioning. Is this real? Is what is being said truly real? Is it? Because it's not. But listen, and it will become more and more obvious that it is not real. They're lost in the concepts that are made up, that are not real. So continue the spiritual practice. Refrain from criticism. Observe. Watch. Listen. Be quiet. Mona. Om. Observe. And then continue to assert truth with the Satyavakya. Om. Om. Right. Shadow boxing. Om. Shadow boxing. The shadows are not real. Om. All the fighting, all the frustration, all of it, all casting around in the nightmare, in the dream. It becomes nightmare when it is so dreamt and believed that it is that it creates such anger, all these seeming human emotions that are so wasteful and so unnecessary, anger and hostility and jealousy and all these emotions that are basically, yes, shadow boxing. Om. Because the shadows are not real. Right, so basically there can be changing of the channel or being quiet or whatever, or yes, mantra would happen, it could occur, especially when there is seemingly alone and the thoughts are maybe racing, negative thoughts, content or whatever that is untrue, and then to break that up, there are various spiritual practices that basically focus the concentration. The primary one being the mantras, various mantras. And of course the main mantra is Om, Om, Om. That is the main mantra, but there are many other mantras, and in Satyavedism the tri maha mantras, etc. that can be referred to, that are core to the Panchavandanam as well. Love. What is love? We're not speaking of mundane love. The question is, what is love? Not speaking of mundane love. Mundane love is not real. It is only a shadow of real love. Most mundane love is about love for a particular object or a seeming body, or the seeming personality of a seeming body, that again is not real, because it is all constantly changing and there is no one fixed personality. If there seems to be behavior of a personality that is predictable, then that is the programming. That is because the body is so used to the programming that the body keeps reconfiguring the seeming personality form, content, pseudo-egoing, and projecting that out seemingly into God in the form of the world and the interactioning with others. And so if there seems to be a static personality, that is a sign that is a huge sign of lack of self-realization. That means that behavior has been so molded, so shaped to repeat and repeat and repeat. It's a programming. There are many, 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 many ways to be programmed, basically. The thought content. So to love a seeming fixed personality is not real love. Because God wants to be free. Free. That is what self-realization and God-realization is about. It's about freedom. And seeming personalities that seem to be very fixed can change into other personalities over time in eternity, seemingly. So to love a particular personality or form, and then some abrupt or elongated change occurs into some other seeming wants and needs and personality that is not real, then what is love when that changes to such a degree that it may not even be recognizable? That is why there are seeming fictional relationships that are constantly being broken up, because then there are changes in that. Then there is, well, this was loved, but now it has become this, and this is not loved. So what was loved? What was loved if it could change so much? And what is loved if it can be so constrained that it stays the same so much? None of that is love. Now, God absolute love. God absolute love is unconditional love. It is unconditional love. And if there are seeming those who say in fiction that there is no such thing as unconditional love, are unintentionally lying. It is not true. There is unconditional love. That those that say that there is not unconditional love, unfortunately, do not know what love is. They do not know what real love is, or have not risen to the level in the dreaming even to know, even within that context, that there can be something that mimics unconditional love, and that can feel real. So God absolute love is unconditional and always is. There is nothing that changes it. So anything can happen seemingly phenomenologically, and it stays constant, because it is seemingly the natural state when all of the sickness is removed. What is left is the natural state seemingly, and then that state, that love becomes obvious. Now in God realization, as opposed to just self-realization, it is seemingly spread out universally to all, because all is God myself. So when there's the realization, there's the self-realization, and then toward the God realization is that God is in everyone else and everything else and everything. And then that union that is not an occurrence, it is just the realization that it already exists. The self-love is not of an individual, it's the self-love of all that is all. God within everything is myself. That is self-love. That is also love of all. The true self. The true self that is within all. So God absolute love is love of all. All. No matter what it might appear to look like, even if it be in the form of what is called in fictional society, God in the form of, quote, in the label of a murderer, or some whatever crimes may have seemingly been committed by an apparent primary body or whatever, that might lead to ostracizing of body, or incarceration of a body, or whatever would be unpardonable behavior. That basically all of the, that within all that is that God is there. God resides there. The true self resides there. And that is where the love of all is unconditional. Because there can be love for seeming murder, bodies that have murdered, or heinous crimes, etc. Or a love of everything. Love of everything, unconditionally. And it does not have to be forced. It does not have to be thought. It's not thought. It's not thought. It's not conceptualized. It just is. It just naturally occurs. It's the nature of God. It naturally occurs. It's not thought. But all of the fiction, all of the pollution, all of it has to be removed for that to become obvious. So what is love? It's beyond even unity. Unity implies that something was separate in the first place and it needs to be brought together. Like this seeming person and that seeming person get together and they're in love or whatever. Or it's beyond even unity, because that it seems to imply separation in the first place. There is no separation, and there never was. So when Satya says, as God, I am you, I know you, there is no separation. There is God absolute love for you as myself, as God. That there's no union, there's no parting. There's only the God one, the God absolute whole. God absolute love. So it is not even union. Love is. There's love, great love for all, for everything. For God, Omni, Om. There's unconditional love in that it doesn't matter what is happening. The love just is. So it may translate in omni-translationally in the fiction, it may shine through that as appearing to that a particular body may seem to be loving to all, universally. And there might be asking, how can that be? How can one seemingly love all without even seemingly knowing each individual that is not real? It don't need to know the individual that's not real. All that needs to be known is the one I in all of that, in all of the seeming individuals. That is my God myself. That's all that needs to be known, and that love will shine. That love is there always. That love that caresses every subatomic particle in the substratum of God Omniverse. That love that is there, that is the love of life. It is the love of God life. That is God absolute love, is that love of God life, of all life. So that is what true love is. It's God absolute love. Universal, unconditional, not of individuals, but it translates into loving all seeming bodies, all apparent bodies. That is what love is. That is the one true love. God love. God absolute love. It's the one love. The only love. God thanks for transmitting that questioning. Om. Freedom. So the questioning is, what is freedom of soul? Or what is the real meaning of freedom? So in the fiction, in the dreaming of the species, there is the concept of freedom, of wanting freedom, of fighting for freedom, of trying to attain freedom, of that all seeming bodies want to be free. So yes, that is a seeming compulsion, is that all seeming bodies want to be free. So within the dreaming, it is the seeming unconscious, although there is no unconscious conscious or whatever, but it is the compulsion or the impulse toward self-realization. It is the inkling or the shining of seeing through what could actually be real freedom. Real freedom would be to be able to permeate all of that obfuscation, all of the covering, seemingly all of the stormy weather, all of the phenomenon that seems to be apparently in the way, all of that seems to be limiting and seems to keep one bound, when in actuality there is no bondage. And in reality there is no true freedom, because then those are what are called dyads. They're opposed. That is what happens in what is called duality, is that there's being bound and there's being free. So on the spectrum, there's this against that. That is dual. So, but there's this impulse toward freedom, because there seems to be so much bondage and there seems to be so much seeming unhappiness. So all bodies seemingly want to be free. But it is an inkling of true freedom. So it is sort of a touchstone of the yearning toward self-realization. But there are many seemingly that cast around trying to have freedom for the body and do not investigate further toward self-realization. So there is looking for freedom for the body. So what happens with that is there are many activities that are done toward freedom for the body. And there might be constant chasing of various activities that can go toward freedom of the body. But eventually that can become frustrating, because there can be casting serially activities toward freedom, but then there is ultimately not relief into true freedom, Because freedom does not have to do with activities, with ephemeral activities that come and go, that wane and wax and wane, that appear and disintegrate and disappear, or maybe occur in some other form or whatever, never the same. So there's this wanting freedom for the body. Now there is God absolute freedom. So the God absolute freedom already is. What you truly are is already free. And beyond free, transcending the word freedom. Because freedom is a concept. Beyond freedom. But the stage is that it feels like freedom. So, God freedom, God independence, God freedom, God as God alone is not bound. So it is not bound, and it does not have to be free, but in speaking in language, the closest way of speaking would be in order to translate that innate quest for freedom, is that God freedom is already. God's already free. There's nothing binding God. The God consciousness already is. It is not disturbed by anything, any of the phenomenon that takes place. It is always pure and free and undisturbed. But as long as there's being the mistakenness of thinking that one is the body that appears, the APB, as long as there's identification with that body and the thoughts about that body and the thoughts about those thoughts and the conceptualization of being any particular way and characterization about oneself as the pseudo-self, as long as that is going on, that freedom is not going to be felt. Now, there is no true free will either. There are many that think that there is true free will. As an individual, there is no free will. It may feel that way, but it is unreal. It is a dream. Free will is a dream. Now, as God consciousness, as God is already free, and the will is the whole will. The whole will. The will of the all of it happening all at once. That whole collective seeming will, that is one will, that is free will. That is free because it is unbound as the all, as God Omni. It is unbound as the whole free will. But as for individual phantom will, it is a dream and fiction, and it is an individual seeming fantasy that one has free will when everything else is affecting everything else. It's reducing it to this small little thing right here and saying, I have free will, I can do anything or whatever. But here, like this, and nothing else is affecting it, nothing else is doing anything to this, right? It's a fantasy. It's like free will. You as God have free will. One will, the whole will. You as a fantasy, personality, body consciousness thing do not have free will. You are dreaming that. So, in order to have true freedom and true free will, and then to transcend that, because that's just conceptual, there has to be self-realization and God-realization of the whole in order to realize that. So casting around in the dream for freedom and without inquiry into the true self and the nature of reality is wasteful of and basically going around in circles, questing for something that cannot be attained in that way. It's not, it's looking in the wrong place. It's looking in the wrong place in the dream for the freedom that already exists. And the dream has to be cleared out. There has to be waking up from the fixation on the fictional content in order to get to the freedom that already exists, and then beyond what's called freedom. So that is the true freedom. True seeming freedom is self-realization and God-realization. And then there's freedom, love and freedom of the whole. All of it. All of it. And then it doesn't matter what the body, the seeming primary apparent body, might have to, the circumstances that it might be seemingly subjected to. Like, for instance, there could be a body, God in the form of a body that is incarcerated, and just extreme example, put into solitary confinement in the dream, in a narrative, in the fiction or whatever. The body's in solitary confinement somewhere, in one little room with bars and everything. So most bodies would be suffering. Well, most bodies would suffer terribly from that, because there's actually believing in whatever thought content would be configuring and going through the neural networks, and there could be torment. But just as easily, if there would be self-realization, there would be no suffering. There could be no suffering. That may seem impossible to many that believe that they are a species or human, that they could be subject to that and not suffer. But it is definitely possible that there would be no suffering, and there would be freedom. But there wouldn't be identification with that body. Well, there would be freedom. But the body may look like it is in a little box. But that is just an extreme example, basically. So for most, then, would there be self-realization, the bodies would be free as well. That is in the God transcension. That is the God vision, that the bodies would reap the benefits of the God absolute freedom that is, when there's realization. when it's realized. So there would be absolute God love and absolute freedom. That's the God transcension. That's toward the God transcension. For all seeming. And not just for apparent God in the form of a particular species, but for all species, for all planets, God in the form of. That there be health, freedom, love. That already exists. It already exists. It's already real. It has to be realized. Om. God, thanks for the God transmitting of that serious questioning. Om. Yes. So there is the suffering. The question is there no suffering because nothing ever happens to God Absolute? So when there is realization of what one truly is, then there is not identification with the body. So even the body starts to cease to suffer. Because the thought content primarily is the way in which bodies suffer, seemingly. In the casting around in the dreaming. So the thought configuration affects the body functioning. So when there is there is ceasing of suffering because there is non-identification with it. But also there is ceasing of the dreaming activity that affects the body that may cause bodily suffering. So there would be mental suffering, and there's bodily suffering that can translate to what is called pain or actual pain. So that there are distinctions between the gifo, the word suffering, and the word pain have different connotations when used in different contexts, seemingly, or whatever. But when there's realization that one is God Absolute, basically, the whole Absolute, then it is realized that there has never been suffering as oneself, as God's self, as God Absolute. There's nothing that has ever happened, and there has never been suffering of the true self, because that self, it never changes. It's immutable. Immutable means it never changes. And in the context of Satyavedism, the word reality, or can be also interchanged with the word actuality. It's the same. They're equal in Satyavedism. Reality, actuality, is that nothing's ever happened to you as God Absolute. Reality and actuality. Reality means what is constant, what does not change. Everything else seems to be phenomenologically happening, coming and going, in the sleeping, the different seeming states that are actually one. There aren't delineations of states. That what seems to come and go, the body disappears when there's sleep. Where did the body go? That the constant is reality is what does not change. It does not change. So when there is realization of the absolute, the true I, the one reality, the one identity, that has never changed, it is unaffected, and nothing has ever happened to it. Everything else comes and goes, but nothing has ever happened to you as God Absolute. Now, as God Whole, God is all of the phenomenon as well. God, that is within God Consciousness. And then what is within God Absolute, within that. So the God manifestation, the God phenomenon, that is God, myself as well. But there's no identification with some seeming small part within God, myself, as even God manifestation, God omniverse. There is only identification with the whole God omniverse, within God consciousness, within God Absolute. That is out of and from God Absolute. So the suffering ceases to exist because it never was true as myself. It was not true as, quote, the little I was like, I was just imagining that. With mental suffering, it becomes obvious that the little I that I thought I was, went through all of that suffering mentally. The little I that I thought I was went through just unimaginable suffering for seeming years and years and years in the dream. But then that gets pulled back, and then it's like, no, not even that. Not even that. Because I do not identify with that it thought it was. It's like dream within dream within dream. Just like pull back. That there's no identification with a former self that was not real. There may have been a body, but that body does not have a linearity either, because it's a constant process that cannot be charted. It cannot be tracked. So the whole pseudo, false narratives of a particular body being born and doing this and that and the other thing, and just did this and did that. The biography, the whole biography, all of that is untrue. There are phenomenological events that occur, and can be chronicled. But those eventings are continuing to occur. It's not that they formally occurred, because, like I said, there is no past. So everything is happening all at once, always, with no chronology, because because what seems to be past is still occurring. It's still, all the repercussions are still being felt in the, it's very difficult to speak of because it's not relative. There's no those ways of speaking about it in language are not true. So it's that everything is always happening all at once, in, like, it would be like in every time, but there is no such thing as time. So it everywhere all at once, happening in seemingly every time, but every time is not a time, and there are no locations of particular places in everywhere, really. It's the whole eventing, God, the whole eventing, God, whole, Om, God whole, Om. So the false pseudo-self identification gets dropped. So when there are questions that occur about any questions about the past, basically, when there's self-realization, that is all would be considered moot, because there's no identification with being that body that was thought to be that because all bodies are myself, everything is myself. So cannot refer to that and say, well, that happened to the most that may be like a nod to the fiction of it would be to speak about the body in what would be considered in language terms the third person. Like, for instance, when Satya speaks, when God is speaking and transmitting through this body and speaking of God, such a Gifo, Satyavatara, is speaking in the what would be considered linguistically as the third person, not as the first person, but there is no person. So to speak of first, this is where linguistics is ridiculous. Linguistics of the first person and the third person and all that. God is not a person, so it cannot even be said that the first person is God, because God is not a person. So it all is ridiculous. But in speaking, it would be, there would be referring to it through God, speaking through a body, referring to that body as a apparent primary body or whatever. But there's no identification with that body as that is myself, this is me. No, or this was me, when speaking about the past of a particular body, to like we're identifying with it. It does not, there's no identification with a past body. There's no identification with one particular body. So the freedom, the absolute freedom, is not of a particular body as a goal. It's freedom from the dream of being identified as a particular body. You're not contained in a body. There's in certain spirituality, there's a reference to being the ocean in a drop, or the or being the universe in a human form or whatever. But all that is untrue. That's not true. That's still conceptually reducing oneself to being identified with the body, even when speaking of the whole. You are not the part. You are not a part. You are the whole. The part does not exist separately from the whole. The part is not a part. It's the whole. It's only the whole. It's not. There's not a part in the whole. There's only the whole. There's only God, whole reality. God is infinite. God cannot be divided. It cannot be made into little pieces and put together or whatever to configure to make a whole. There are no parts that make a whole. There's only the whole. So anyway, it'll become obvious that even the suffering was unreal too. There's no identification with that suffering. Now that's not to say that then that makes it so that if there seemingly is suffering that is occurring, that it need not be alleviated because it's just not real. Of course not. As long as there are feelings of that there is suffering, or there's the seeing of suffering, the vision of suffering that is occurring, then it needs to be alleviated. But it has to be alleviated in the real manner of alleviation. Because almost all of the suffering is mental suffering, seemingly, of thought content that is unreal. That's why it is expressed as the dream, or the waking up out of a dream. The metaphor, seemingly, of it is the dream, waking up out of the dream. It's expressed that way because when there is realization, it is seen that all of that is like this gigantic dream. It looks that way. And then there's like seeing through it. They're seeing through it that of what reality really is, and then there's this. But anyway, there's no identification with it. But there still needs to be alleviation of the suffering, regardless. That's the evolution. The Gifo species must evolve. That is the part of the seeming evolution, is that they become less and less dreamlike in that way, and become more and more conscious of reality. The various seeming stages of evolution is to become more and more aware of actual reality. And then the suffering will cease. In the God evolution, there shall be less and less suffering. Seemingly, what it looks like, what it appears to be. Again, there's the distinction between what is called Githo, suffering, and pain. Because there are bodies that are feeling pain that is primarily caused by suffering. But then there are some events that occur where bodily pain occurs that does not have to deal with what might be configured as mental. But even bodily suffering that is not affected by mental conditioning can be transcended as well. But this has already been expressed. But there is no expecting that knowledge is widely known. It is not widely known that there can be transcending of physical pain. There can be. And it becomes obvious through spiritual practicing that even physical pain can be transcended and not felt. It can't felt. There are bodies that have been incinerated and while there is no feeling, but that is not common knowledge, and so it should not be expected that level of knowing is to occur yet. In the God transcension, though, it shall be obvious. The question is, should we believe that humanity is the only religion of the universe, of God Absolute? No. No. So there's the idea that true religion basically would be the union of humanity. In fiction, it would be that if all humanity got together and seemingly in the dreaming loved one another, and there were no more wars, and everyone understood everyone, and that is, in the dreaming, that is a collective evolutionary stage. It's a process toward God knowledge. It's only a stage in the evolution, and it is not even a healthy stage, because it can be transcended without having to go through that stage. Really, it's almost problematic in that way. The solution is to go past that stage, to directly, because it only encourages species centrism. To speak of humanity as being one and to make humanity into a religion is idolatry. There are so many different ways that seemingly God, in the form of seeming humanity, has used basically idolatry as religion, to extol a part and to as being above the whole in its fixation on it. So it leads the awareness to reside, to concentrate on a particular species. So to make a religion out of humanity is idolatry. It's taking the collective part in the dream, and extolling it. So that it may seem like a great stage spiritually for all humanity to love itself. But it is only prolonging the dream by concentrating on species centrism. There has to be love of all. So the future of humanity and the great love of humanity and making humanity a religion is not going to solve is not going to solve this. It may happen that is going toward that in the evolution of, instead of the fighting and the conflict and the seemingly endless wars and all of that. But that is not the solution. And the solution can be obtained in a more direct manner than going even through that evolutionary process. That it need not be that way, it need not be done that way. So no, humanity should not be made into a religion. No. The religion is the being of God. Religion does not have to look for a God to worship. That is archaic religion. That's dualistic religion. It posits that I as a little person or thing, or we as a group, are worshiping a God, whether the God be elsewhere or whether the God seemingly is omnipresent in some way, and then not going past that conceptually, because that's the problem. It's the concepts. That God is not a concept. So the evolution seemingly of religion and spirituality is the realization of oneself and the realization of God, that there is no me, there is no I and God. There is only God. So true religion and spirituality is being God. Is being God. Not a human, not a thing, not a little thing, not body consciousness. It's God consciousness. God consciousness, not group consciousness, not species consciousness, not body consciousness. It's God consciousness. It's whole consciousness, because that is all that exists. That is all there is. So if they're speaking of religion, it should be God. God is the religion. God is the spirituality. That is the highest truth. That is the highest truth. In religion and spirituality. And go directly. Do not make anything an idol. Whether it be a person or a group or a concept or ideas, or do not idolize anything. There's nothing to idolize. There is only God. True religion and spirituality is being God. There is God blessing. Now there is transmitting of calling through GIFO Facebook messengering. So there's referring to that, because the transmitting and receiving of God information was being done primarily through what is called commenting. So now there's adding of the mode of audioing, if that may or may not occur with this Satsanga. God, and the happening of. So when there are seemingly incoming, God and the happening of occurring calls, there may not be the viewing of this live streaming Satsanga occurring. There may not be knowledge of that. So then there would have to be speaking about that, so that there would be awareness that participating in the Satsanga is being live streaming is occurring and being recorded and such. So if there is seeing right now in eternity, if there is seeing of the Satsanga right now, and there is wanting to call, knowing that the Satsanga is occurring, proceed. And God blessings, and you're welcome. God, welcoming God for asking for inquiring with such wonderful God questioning. This is what was spoken of in the previous satsanga about, is that there should be serious asking of questioning, and not questions that would be inconsequential or not seemingly appropriate. That, of course, all of the satsangas are open to God Omni, all, even seeming those that might not be taking the content seriously, or being or unaware of what is actually occurring, and then would shortly be made aware. All right. So here is a call. Calling, transmitting, receiving, incoming. Wait, hold on. Wait, hold on. Is there... All right, is God in the happening. Om Pranam, Om Pranam, Om Pranam God. So is there viewing the Satsanga right now? Om? All right, lost connection here. Om? All right, then there's here's here, all right. Om Pranam.
Hari Om, Hari Om.
Om Pranam God. Is there viewing? Hari Om. Is there viewing of the Satsanga right now?
What is your name? Hari Om, Hari Om.
Is there viewing of the Satsanga occurring live stream right now? Is there seeing that?
हम भी आपके अखाड़े में पूजा करना आना चाहता हूँ बाबा जी बनने, नागा बाबा जी. Hello?
Is there
Hello?
Yes, Is there hearing of the voice?
हम भी आपके अखाड़ा में उसी जन्म मैं भी आना चाहता हूँ बाबा जी बनने. हरि ओम, हरि ओम.
Om Hari Om. Is speaking in the language of English? Is that possible?
मैं तो काशी का रहने वाला हूँ, काशी का बनारस का भोले बाबा विश्वनाथ जी का नगरी में रहने वाला. Hello?
Oh, hold on.
What's your name? मैं भी बाबा जी बनना चाहता हूँ, आपका शिष्य. Hello?
It seems like there is no seeing of the satsanga. They'll be sending a link right now. A link is being sent. God and the happening of. Hold on.
मैं भी बाबा जी बनना चाहता. आप ही के गुरु में हर हर महादेव, हर महादेव.
All right.
हर महादेव, हर महादेव. हेलो. आप हमसे कहाँ से मिलेगी? इस समय कहाँ पे हो आप? हेलो.
Okay, here is. All right, there was a calling, and a link is sent to the live stream satsanga right now. So So see what happens with how that occurs. All right. So there can be calling. If there is the viewing of this live stream video in live streaming satsanga occurring right now in God Eternity, then call. And if there are calls that occur, if there is calling that occurs phenomenologically, and there is not seeing the videoing, then the link to the live streaming can be provided so that there's awareness of what is occurring. And there should be the speaking of English, God in the form of English, although there can be learning Godlang. Satya is going to be transmitting in Godlang, is transmitting in Godlang, is encouraging in transmitting and receiving the use of Godlang as this gets more and more familiar. Oh, and speaking of, again, this is Githo is God in the happening of, Gitfo is God in the form of, Gitfo, Githo, Getern is God eternity, Getern, and Ginfini is God infinity. That's basic Godlang 101 initiation level. And there can be spiritual practice of those four main the vocabulary, and then the one true I, the one whole one I, not the pronouns of relativity that do not exist, not the use of those pronouns, but that's in another level of Godlang. All right, so then there should be speaking there should be some knowledge of the language of English. And if not, then what can happen in subsequent satsangas is that there can be translating of, for example, the Gitfo Hindi, and there as the God Intel Tech grows in its capabilities, there can be the simultaneous translationing of languaging. So this is to become the God evolution as well, that all seemingly will be able to speak in multiple languages and be understood, but the goal is toward Godlang and the integration of those multiple languages. All right. It's going to transmit this call. So there can be transmitting and receiving. Om Hari Om. Om Pranam. Om. Is there viewing? This is Satya. Satyavatara. God in the form of. Is there viewing?
Yes.
Is there viewing of the Satsangha that is occurring right now in eternity?
Yes. Om Satya.
So there's set. Hold on. You're sending the link to the Satsangha.
Yes.
Wait. We'll be calling right back. Hold on. There.
Hello.
So there was a link that is just sent that is to the live stream satsanga that is occurring right now. So there was calling. So the questioning, there's participation in the satsanga, and if there is questioning that is serious about or inquiry about self-realization, etc., then proceed.
Yes. Hello.
Yes.
Yes. Where are you living?
Oh. So Satya is going to speak in absolute terms. That Satya speaks truth. So I am living as God omniverse, as God manifestation within God absolute that is myself. That is, so I am living everywhere as God manifestation, the one living being. And that is you. Now in God Lang there is no you. So there is only I, there's only the one I. But in order to speak so that there might be understanding, at least initially, then they'll be speaking of you as capital U. So that is what you are. So what you, when there's asking where do I live? So you do not live in a particular location because there is no locality in God Absolute. So you are everywhere. So it's not just that I am everywhere. It's you are everywhere as I.
You are everywhere.
Yes. So now you say I am everywhere. Go ahead. I am everywhere.
Yes, but where are you living in your ashrams?
So the Satya is not. See, even in Godlang it can be expressed. So Satya can start to explain where the body resides, where the primary parent body resides. But for now, there's going to be holding off on that. In Godlang, there's going to be able to be explaining that in order to transact certain behavioring so that there can be speaking about it. But for the Satsangahas, at least initially right now, we have to go direct to what you are. So in order to go direct to what you are, which is myself, I cannot speak of my as if I were a body. So even in Godlang, even though what is being asked can be answered in a relative way, seemingly within Godlang, Satya is not going to placate, it's not going to encourage that. So no, there's not going to be speaking about where this resides because I am not a body. Because it will encourage you to identify with what you think is your body and where your body is located, and that is not truth. Satya is supposed to bring you out of that dream, seemingly. Bring you out of that dream. So going down into the dream and speaking about you within the dream as a person is not going to help you get out of the dream. So please with no this has to be asserted. You have to start to assert yourself as you really are, not as the dream character. All right?
Yes.
So
Right.
that is the answer. Go ahead. So what other inquiries are there into self-realization, into God realization? The serious questioning. And this is being done with God love. This is being done with God absolute love. So when there is calling in to speak, do not misperceive this as being difficult or that this is all being done in God love. But in true God love, you need to know who you are, who you truly are. That is real love in order to get you to know what you really are. So go ahead.
Yes.
All right, proceed. Go ahead.
I am a big fan of Mahadev, Shiv.
So what is that? Like Shiva?
Yes, Shiva.
Right. Well, Shiva is God.
Shiva is my God.
Right.
Shiva is my life.
But are you speaking of Shiva as a person or Shiva as God, as Brahman, as the whole?
Yes,
Because
Shiva is a God.
Because Shiva, as in Shiva, is another word for God, but not Shiva as being a person, right? Like that.
Yes, yes.
Right. So yes. So in Godlang or whatever, when Satya refers to God, Satya is referring to all names of God. So whatever name there is that is being used that can be substituted for in place of the word God, because it's not about the concept. So if they're speaking and saying, I am Shiva, then that is saying I am God. So you have to be speaking. So you have to say, I am Shiva, and I am not a little body. I'm not a human body that's located somewhere. So you say, I am Shiva, but then there has to be realizing that. So they can't say, I am Shiva, and then continue to still believe and act as if you are a little body. That's because then they won't have Shiva's power. The God Shakti, God power, God energy, true power happens whenever the realization occurs, and then the God realization or Shiva realization would be that all that power that it's incumbent, that all the power then starts to become manifest. It's otherwise known as an awakening of sorts. So if there, so is there saying I am Shiva, or is there just worship of Shiva?
Okay.
What is it? Is it the idea that I am worshiping Shiva, or is it the feeling of I am Shiva?
Yes, you are Shiva.
But you say I am Shiva.
Yes, you are Shiva.
No, say it.
I am Shiva.
That's right. Say that again.
Yes. Shiva is my heart.
There's no separation. There is no that I am worshiping Shiva. There is that I am Shiva.
Yes.
So what there should be done is that there should be practice. There should be practicing the assertion, I am Shiva. There is.
You are Indian?
No, I am not Indian. I am Shiva.
Oh.
Yes. I am Shiva. I
Shiva
am God.
Is an Indian God.
No, there's no such thing as an Indian God. There's only God. There's only Shiva.
Only God. No.
Shiva is not an Indian God. Shiva is Shiva. Shiva is God.
Shiva is Shiva. Yes, Shiva
So
is
Shiva
God. Shiva
does not have a nationality. Shiva does not have a heritage. Shiva is everything. Shiva is God. Shiva is Om. Shiva is Allah. Shiva is all the words. So
Shiva is all of God.
It's a seeming aspect of God, perhaps, or a way of expressing God, but is still.
Shiva is a God, not a religion.
No, Shiva is God. Shiva is not a God. Shiva is God.
Yes.
Yeah, just like I am not a person, I am God. It's not a part.
Yes.
Right. So But there should be identification with being Shiva.
You are sacred and Shiva.
What's that?
Yes?
Oh, well, Shiva, God energy, God Prakriti as Shakti, as God energy. So
Yes,
because
yes.
there is no, with God absolute, God's energy is innately, inherently within God absolute and God consciousness. So there's no separation of Shiva and Shakti or power. There's no separation. There's it's all inherently God omnipotence. It's God omnipotence. Or Shiva omnipotence.
Okay.
So the main point being that there are no individuals as that. So
Yes.
think
What is the main point?
think of, or go past the thinking of it and start to feel that Shiva, that there is no separation between you as you think you are a person and Shiva as God. That Shiva is permeating the body completely. So there is no separation of the body with Shiva. Shiva is transcendent and immanent. It's immanent within the seeming apparent body. So that may be one of the first ways to go toward the realization of being one with Shiva, is to feel that Shiva is within every subatomic particle of that body that you seem to be identified with, because they're not limited to that body, and there is no location of the body. The body is not located in any particular country, because it's the whole God omniverse. The countries are not real. Countries are not real. They're invented. The distinction between land masses, of dividing land masses into categories of nationality and country is species fiction. It's not real. This God information is.
How long have you had this retirement?
Say again. Speak God in the happening of.
Yes.
Speak that again. What was that?
How long have you had this retirement?
What is called? How long have you had this retirement? Was the question? This is not a body. It's not a body. So it's not speaking in the terms of that. It can that question can be omni-translated. It can be God omni-translationally understood. But yet again, there's redirecting back to the true self, the true I. So there is no speaking about identification with the body that is seemingly being projected. I have always been eternally in the condition of that is immutable, that never changes. It never changes. It's always it is the constant that seems to be present throughout all phenomenological eventings. Those eventings seem to come and go and transform, etc. But that is an illusion, because there is no continuity like that. So even the speaking about phenomenon coming and going basically is not real, because it posits a linearity of some sort that doesn't exist.
Can we talk on video calls?
There is to be video call at some point in the God vision, but as the Satsanghas progress, but as the Satsanghas are occurring for now in eternity, there's texting and audio transmitting and the receiving, and there can be viewing of the Satsanga video that is occurring right now. There's a link that was sent that to the video that's occurring right now. Is there seeing of the image?
Yes.
All right. So then there should be saying this so that this is apparent. It's already been said, but it needs to be said again. That the Satya is speaking, and the Satsangas are occurring that need to be propagated in God in the form of the world in en masse. It has to spread. The speaking has to spread for all. So Satya is not taking, transmitting and receiving what are called just transmitting, seemingly, apparently looking like that, individually, one-on-one calls, because this information, this God information, is so important that it cannot be limited to what is considered one-on-one interactioning that is not real. It needs to be spread and propagated and become mass information. So it needs to always be public, even though there is no privacy in God. All this information needs to be disseminated to many, all at once. So if there is wanting for the interactionings to occur, then it has to be done what is called publicly, with many watching and many more to God in the form of in God consciousness to absorb this information.
Tell me. What's your good name?
Name? There are many names to this particular seeming illusory form, hallucination. So there's Gifo, Sri Satyavatara. There is could be Sri Satya, could be Satya, could be Satyaji, Swamiji, Swami Satyasamujananda. It could be Gurudev.
Your name will be mentioned Swami Sri Swami Satyasamujananda.
Right. Gurudev, Mahadev, Satya, Satguru, etc. Whatever formally would like to use the label.
My Guruji name is Sri 1008 Ashutosh Giri Maharaj Naga Baba Sri Panchadas Nam Juna Khada.
Oh, nice. Oh, but the real name is God or Shiva. That's the real name.
Yes.
So that it went. So Satya, the name that is known when there are, it depends on what is on context or whatever, but it can be, but it is Satya because Satya is truth. So then it's not referring to a body. Then it transcends, even in the name label, it transcends a particular body label by saying in fact Satya. So the name is Satya. Satya is another word for God as well. Oh, truth. So whether questioning that, is there any questioning that would point toward the true self? Because that is what the inquiries are for. The inquiries are toward self-realization. So is there knowledge? Is there at least?
Do you know about Naga Sadhus?
Speak of that.
Yes.
Well, speak about that.
Do you know about Naga sadhus?
The sadhus. God in the form of, seemingly, apparently. So speak about that. What questioning is there? Are there questionings about practice, spiritual practicing? Go ahead. Go ahead.
Who is the messenger of Lord Shiva?
Oh, so no, there's not going to be mythology. Mythology is illusion. Mythology is not real. So the stories, even if the stories are spiritual stories, Satya does not encourage the indulging in spiritual stories toward self-realization. It is not direct. It is not directly to God. It is some of the what would be called spiritual stages in the spiritual story spiritual story. Spiritual narrative is all the years that it seemingly takes in fiction to progress spiritually, and that has to do with speaking and going into all of the storytelling that is supposed to help spiritual progress toward spiritual understanding. But Satya goes straight to truth. So speaking about in mythology, in spiritual mythology,
what kind of practice do you do?
Such as beyond practice. The body is put to endless experimentation. The body is put through endless spiritual seeming experimentation, and would be called
Hindi language.
Would be seemingly referred to as multiple realizations that are countless. So because because the body is the apparent body is Purna Avatara. So this and I am not this body is being spoken about. So the body cannot be said to be in need of spiritual practice because it is well beyond that.
Do you understand Hindi language?
Satya understands all languages as God myself as the whole. So as for this,
but you can speak comfortable Hindi language, Hindi.
I am not this body, so it cannot be speaking about it like that. You're referring to the false you, the false I. The false I. It's the false you.
No.
And Satya does not answer those questions.
How are you? Aap kaise hain?
They're referring to the false you. That is being spoken about is the you in quotation marks, the small you that is a fictional phantom in the dream. So this as God, speaking directly as God, as this is Shiva speaking directly within the dream to seemingly wake you up out of it, even though the you that's being said is not, because there's identification with the body. At some point, those video calls will be made into being able to be seen transactionally, so there can be the transmitting and receiving, showing in the videoing of the Satsanghas. That is not occurring yet. So that is God,
Yes.
God vision
Yes,
that.
I believe I am conversation is satsang.
But that is to happen at some point in the God visioning.
It's your choice.
All right. So this is for there is welcoming for another transactioning that is to occur for subsequent Satsanghas, but there is now the opening up to other transactionings. So there is God pranam, Om pranam, and God thanks for this transactioning. Om. Om. Om Hari Om. God blessings. Om.
Okay, yes, Hari Om, God
Om.
bless you.
Om.
Om Namo Narayan.
So call again in eternity, seemingly. Om. Om.
Yes.
Om. Yes, God information said God information needs to spread to everyone is so important. That's why we're spreading the right way of worship, that God is Kabir based on Holy Scriptures. God is everything. God is all Scriptures. Om. All right. Om. 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 Set. Om. Stop. Om. Satya is to answer questions about selection criteria. Satya is still to some extent being lenient in the incoming, in the transmitting and receiving, because the Satsanghas have seemingly just begun basically in God eternity, but then based upon what is occurring and all. That criteria may change in some way. As right now in eternity is open to all, and as it should be. But as for the criteria of selecting, incoming, transmitting, the receiving, that may or may not change. For now, it's being lenient about it, because there may not be a lot of familiarity with Satya and Satya interactioning, so there's keeping that open. However, when there is responding, though, there is still going to be assertion of truth. So there may be the questioning that is relative when it is being received, and as just seen in the transactioning that has occurred, that there is not being lenient as to the answering, as to the responding with God truth information. There is assertion of the real I, period. So, and there, Satya is not going to let those God in the form of that are calling for the transactioning to get away with continuing to assert the pseudo I, the fictional I, because that is not. It is not going to happen. So there can be there can be attempting to get Satya to speak in relative fictional terms, but that is not going to benefit the seemingly those that are calling for God truth. So the calls may continue to come in. There is not going to be, as for now, in other words, the answer is that the criteria is open. The criteria is open, but then again, it is primarily audio form and text for now, and then to evolve and mutate into video because there are means for that. There's God in the form of what would be called the WSSVs, which are the webinars, where there can be mass communication in video participationing, but that is to come. As for now, this is seemingly a more intimate atmosphering that is transmitting, and even within that context, there may be some video interactionings that are to be viewable, but that is to proceed for now in eternity. This is how it is occurring, and there's working with that to get this to be successful. Okay. There is a friend requesting on Facebook here. All right, that what is called a friend requesting has been successful, is successful now. So there can be calling. And there seems from the questionings within the content that the level of inquiry is on a higher level than some of the other inquiry that is being received. Again, Satya is being lenient about the seeming levels of the inquiry, at least for now, because this is just, there's a transitioning of what seems to apparently be a familiarity that is starting to occur, of more frequent satsanga happenings. But again, this needs to be reiterated over and over again. So it is to be said again, because there are some that are coming, seemingly viewing coming in and out of the Satsanga eventing, and may have missed information. So this is being reiterated again, seemingly. Only it's fresh and new and always in eternity. If they're wanting to participate in the Satsanghas, God speaking to God about God, and wanting knowledge, then the inquiry should be of the nature of actual seeking, quote unquote, of seeking toward self-realization and toward God realization, toward wanting to know what one truly is and what reality is, and why the world is as it seems to be, and whether it actually is what it seems to be, etc., etc., etc. All the questions that, so there are venues, there are ways to get spiritual information that from what would be considered God in the form of seemingly looking like conventionally in relativity, spiritual teachers and wanting spiritual practices or wanting advice for certain life situations of when one is thinking that one is a body, when one is in body consciousness, when one is identifying with a body and wanting to figure out life circumstances and what can make the body be in better circumstances, and all sorts of questions that might occur that have to do with body consciousness. So there are God in the form of those that would be considered clerics or whatever, or of the various religions, and then they're usually seeking advice from God in the form of those in the dream, and getting advice about life experiences and all. Satya Avatar is not for that. That is not what this is for. So if there are just sort of mundane questioning about how to do mundane activities and seeking advice of that nature or whatever, if there's wanting to call anyway, then Satya will try to wake you up out of that dream, and might do it rather abruptly, because then you're sort of like unaware that what is going to be met with is not going to be what is projected upon as being what you're trying to request. So you may inadvertently come in upon and with unintentionally seemingly getting a response, but it's not going to appear to be the response that you're going to be expecting. So that is why it's being left open right now to all possibilities, because God can work that way too. And it could be a sudden abrupt, what is this, or whatever. And so there is that possibility as well. If you want to call anyway, even though this has been said, that if they seem to be looking for something small and just want to ask little questions or whatever, then perhaps there might be looking elsewhere. But if you want to call in because somehow God in the form of, or are drawn toward this, then that's probably for a good reason why you may be drawn toward this, because nothing is a coincidence. There are no coincidences. So if there is viewing of this, then it is meant to be. So if there was wanting to call in anyway, given that context, then so be it.
Hello.
Hello. Hold on. A link was just sent, seemingly. No. All right, but God is asking a question. What's your WhatsApp number? Okay. So for the million questions of that one question, So Satya is responding because God wants to know what Satya's WhatsApp number is. All right. I am all WhatsApp numbers. So there is no possession. I do not have a WhatsApp number. I am not a person. And you do not have a WhatsApp number. You are not a person as God. As for the interactioning, in what is called God in the form of Facebook messaging, there is the ability to transact God transmitting and receiving of God information. That is to go toward the Satsangahas, not toward individual responsing. So the platform, God in the form of the platform of WhatsApp, is not being used right now. Perhaps it is to be used at some point in the God vision, but it is unnecessary to use the WhatsApp numbers, the WhatsApp platform for that right now, when most of the interactioning is occurring on God in the form of the Facebook messaging. And so there is that possibility that is to occur. But as for now, there should be responding in God in the form of Gitfo, Facebook messaging. And also there's Gitfo Discord, but that may be used. It is open to be used. In fact, there should be checking. But that is to grow because of the God Intel Tech. That is to be growing at some point. But it is there and it is open. All right, so that inquiry seems to be very, very initial. Speaking of contact details, and so they'll be sending the info, God in the form of the Satyavedism info port information. That is a link in the description, God in Gitfo, the description of the live streams. If there's looking in the description of the live streaming, then there are 7 or so links to pertinent, important introductory information. So look for those links, and then follow those links, and then there'll be a lot, much God information that initially to satisfy the request for that information. That need not be transmitted in the Satsangha in that way. All right. And if there was a God, when Satya speaks, when Satya is speaking, Satya's the teachings pour forth from the seeming body hallucination. When there's speaking and it's flowing, then there is not receiving of the calling. The speaking is primary, and then the calling occurs when the transmitting of certain informationing is when the flow, the seeming flow is finished, and then more flowing occurs or whatever. So it is not the calling is not interrupting the speaking when the teachings are going on in full flow. Also, when Satya speaks, or when there's seemingly any activity of Satya whatsoever, as God is speaking through this body right now about it, Satya, the activities that seem to flow forth from Satyavatara body are devoted exclusively in total to God truth transmission, in all forms, completely. It is the teachings and the mission of God in the form of and God in the happening of Satyavedism, completely Om, entirely Om. No other activities, period. All activities are God truth information. Even when the activities may appear not to be, those activities are still totally and exclusively for God realization and God self-realization and God realization, the dissemination of God information in God in the form of the world, the mission of Satyavedism, the propagation of all of it in God in the form of the world, all of it. There is not one tiny, intricate, teeny-weeny possible movement that is not about God truth. Even if it may appear not to be, it is. So that needs to be expressed. That needs to be understood. So when there is questioning God in the form of the seeming avatar about it or his activities or whatever, then it should just be known that there are no seeming extracurricular activities or unrelated activities to God's service, to the mission of Satyavedism. Now again, I am God, and this God is speaking through this body. I'm speaking through the digital representation of this body. But I am not this body. And you are not, quote unquote, I. You are not this body. You are not a body. So the questions, asking questions about this body or whatever within body consciousness, yes, it is omni-translatable, it is understood, it is seemingly normal within the dream. It's very seemingly normal. But this is to wake you up to what you are already. So do not expect. Just do not expect that it is going to go